give you, whether you agree with them or not. All right, we'll turn to the opening address of the people. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you very much, Judge. Good afternoon, everybody. I would be remiss if I didn't start by thanking you very, very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I enjoyed meeting all of you, and I look forward to presenting the evidence to you in this particular case. I thank you for your willingness to serve. Look, you know as well as I do that you could have gone up there and said something to the judge, and he would have said, well, you know, see ya, we're not going to need this person. You didn't do that. You reached down inside of yourself and you said, look, I want to do my civic duty, I want to be fair, I want to listen to the evidence in this case. And you have respect for the process, and I appreciate that. And that begs the question, why me? Why, what did these four very experienced lawyers see? Well, we saw, all four of us, the right stuff. And what I see in front of me is the collective wisdom of this county. Every single one of you has a different background. Many of you are parents, some of you are grandparents, a lot of you have diverse jobs. All of those experiences collectively will bring you, I think, to a verdict in this particular case. You feel you can make a decision, and I want you to use that good, God-given common sense that you have. And we had some light moments in the jury selection, talking about hairs and soup and CSI and things like that. But now it gets a little more serious, because now we're in the process of determining the guilt or non-guilt of this defendant, Stacey Castor. And I hope and I trust that each and every one of you are as anxious to start hearing the proof as I am to present it to you. But I want to explain my role to you. Judge made it very, very clear. An opening statement is a prelude as to what's to come. I don't think it would be fair. I'm required by law to give one, but I would prefer to give one anyway, because it's not fair to ask you to sit through a case that has been taking many, many months to develop and just hear it blind. So that's why this opening statement, I think, is important to you. I emphasize again, as the judge did, what I say is not evidence. I wasn't anywhere near this crime, these crimes back in 05 and 07. If I make in your mind, the most eloquent opening statement in the history of mankind, it matters nothing, because you haven't heard a single witness. No one, folks, will come in here and say, I heard Stacey Castor admit to these crimes. On the contrary, the people are going to present a number of witnesses to you that will say, from the day she was charged, this defendant has steadfastly said she had absolutely nothing to do with any of these crimes. But nonetheless, as Ms. Garvey and I present this mountain of evidence to you over the next several weeks, I suggest to you that the evidence will point to the guilt of this defendant, and the final outcome you will have only one path to one verdict. Let me begin by saying why we're here. We're here because an Onondaga County grand jury has returned an indictment against the defendant. As the judge has emphasized several times, it is not evidence of anything. It is simply a framework by which this case must proceed. I will read it to you very briefly. It's been a while since you heard it. And it's what I must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. The first count charges Stacey Castor with the crime of murder in the second degree. And it is alleged here in this county, in the town of Clay, during the time period August the 19th, 2005 through August the 21st, 2005, she intentionally caused the death of David Castor, her husband at the time, by poisoning him with antifreeze. The second count charges this defendant with attempted murder in the second degree. It alleges that on or about the 13th day of December, 2007, again in the town of Clay in this county, the defendant attempted to cause the death of her daughter, Ashley Wallace, by poisoning her with a lethal combination of pharmaceutical substances that were mixed in with an alcoholic beverage. The third count, Very, very technical language. I won't read it all to you. The judge will explain the law to you on it all at the end of the trial. But the third count alleges that in December of 2005, after the death of her husband, David Castor, this defendant presented a phony will in surrogate's court in an effort to get all of his inheritance. These crimes, these three crimes that I'll talk to you about, including a fourth not mentioned in the indictment because it did not occur in this county, will be the framework of our case. And now, for the very first time anywhere, despite what anybody has seen, read, or heard, for the very, very first time anywhere in the history of this case, let me tell you what the evidence will show. And I'll do this, folks, with a calendar, because I think sometimes it can be helpful. This is Chuck, August of 2005.
Judge, I don't mean to interrupt, but could we place the exhibit in position so that we could also see?
It's just a calendar, Judge. I've tried this in various points throughout the courtroom. If I move it, the jury's not going to be able to see it.
Do you want to move
I can move that.
to this portion over here?
Where would you like me, Judge?
Wherever you can see the calendar, if you want to come around here.
It's the early afternoon of August 22nd, 2005. You all know we have a 911 center. The 911 center gets a call that had been referred to another police agency. It's not really a police emergency, but they get a call from a woman who identifies herself as Stacey Castor. She indicates that she wants assistance getting into her house, more particularly getting into her own bedroom, because she's worried about her husband, David Castor, who's in the bedroom, and she's worried that maybe he might hurt himself or he might hurt her. So no particular alarm bells go off. Police respond depending on availability. They probably get 100 calls like that every month. And one member of the Onondaga County Sheriff's Department who responds is Deputy Willoughby. Deputy Willoughby comes up, identifies himself, who he is, and he meets a woman who's sitting in a lawn chair smoking a cigarette, and who he eventually learns is the person that made that phone call, Stacey Castor. She then engages in a conversation with him. She repeats her concerns. She says to him basically, look, I'm worried about my husband. I'd like you guys maybe to help me get in there. And then she begins to fill him in on some of the activities that occurred on Friday the 19th, on Saturday the 20th, on Sunday the 21st, up until the time they're meeting on Monday the 22nd. She points out the location of where her husband's bedroom is within the framework of the house. And she claims that she's now locked out of that bedroom. Okay. Deputy Willoughby doesn't do anything different than probably you would do. Knocks on the door. He hears a TV inside. Still trying to help. He goes outside. It's a nice day. He actually gets one of those little step ladders, and he puts it up next to the window that Mrs. Castor has identified to him as his bedroom window, and he tries to look in, see what the heck is going on here. He can't get any visual response because of the shades. He doesn't really see anything of any moment. And then he says to the defendant, look, I think the best way to handle this is I'm just going to break the door down. Is that okay? The defendant says, sure. Go ahead. She agrees. And, you know, you won't get a sense of how much pressure he had to use, but you'll see the door. Willoughby's not going to tell you it took an awful lot of pressure to get in there. And he gets in, and I want you to picture this in your mind. You'll see photos of it, but as he comes in, be off to his left, he sees a bed, and on the bed is the body of David Castor. David is sprawled at about a 45-degree angle on the bed. He's not wearing any clothing. He has expelled a lot of material from his mouth. A lot of that is visible in the room. There's vomitus on the mattress. There's also no bedding on the bed. It's been stripped almost completely. And tragically, there are no life signs. It's pretty obvious that David Castor is deceased. Deputy Willoughby, along with brother and sister officers that eventually arrive, they begin to chronicle the scene. They want to make sure that everything is preserved should this turn out to be something that needs to go to court. They want to observe the physical evidence, and they begin to see certain items of physical evidence that in their mind may have some relevance to your ultimate decision in this case. And they begin to collect a lot of evidence. The vast majority of it you probably won't see because it doesn't have relevance according to the lawyers in this case, but you will see a lot of the stuff that was recovered from this Wetzel Road address. And look, we talked about on jury selection about how some people get something in their mind and they get stuck with that and they're afraid to admit at some later point that, you know, geez, I screwed up. I made a mistake. And they get into a corner. It's the exact opposite of what happened here. There was a significant body of thought at that crime scene that this was a suicide, that David Castor had taken his own life. And frankly, the theory is buttressed by a number of things. Deputy Willoughby, along with a number of other people, and you're going to see it too, they see a container of antifreeze that's just jutting out about halfway up the bed on the right-hand side. If I was standing at the base of the bed, I'd be looking at the bed, I would see David Castor's body sprawled out, his feet on my right, his head on my left, and on the right side of the bed, about halfway up, is a jug of peak antifreeze that is sticking out just a little bit. That's number one. Number two, the widow, now widow, who was here, says, well, he'd been depressed. Mrs. Castor tells the deputies he'd been upset about this, upset about that, he was upset about the death of his father, his business isn't going that well. So the medical examiner does an autopsy, finds out that the cause of death is ethylene glycol, fancy word for antifreeze, poisoning. And this case has been generally treated as a suicide. Now, it's been my experience that you will hear the defense for an accused say, hey, time out, police, time out, prosecutors. You made a rush to judgment here. But here it's just the opposite. It's the prosecution and a number of very thorough detectives who say, somebody else made a rush to judgment. Let's take a careful look at all the evidence in this case. Let's find out, soup to nuts, what do we know about David Castor? What do we know about the physical evidence that we're recovering from this scene before we make a rush to judgment? The defendant was interviewed that day. One of the detectives felt that under the circumstances, because of her demeanor, might be a good idea to wait till the following day to actually take a formal written statement. You'll see that formal written statement. You'll actually be able to read it, and it'll be read to you during the course of this trial. She certainly appeared upset on the 22nd. She was cooperative in the sense that she gave a statement. She didn't have to, but she did. And you, as fact finders, will not make the same rush to judgment. Here's what the defendant says in that statement, basically, and I'm not going to read it verbatim. I'll just go through it briefly because I want to give you a flavor of what she has to say. The defendant says that on Friday, August the 19th, her husband David comes home from his business. She actually is an employee of the business. It's a heating and cooling business that he owned. And he comes home on Friday and pretty much wants to have a cocktail and get comfortable. The defendant says that she was preparing a celebratory anniversary dinner. I guess their anniversary was maybe the day before, a couple of days before. So everything was shaping up kind of nice in her mind, according to what she told the detectives. Her two children from a previous marriage are Ashley and Bree Wallace. And the two girls, they're going to spend the night somewhere else so that David and the defendant can have some privacy. She claims that David said, well, I had a big job today, and it was really stressful for me, and it's really bugging me. She also claims that he was still upset about the death of his father that had occurred earlier that summer. And then they began, while he continues to drink, much heavier than normal according to her, they began to argue. Sometimes trivial things, sometimes substantive things. They're arguing about Ashley and Bree. We want to go on vacation. I don't want David is allegedly saying I don't want Ashley and Bree to come with us on vacation. And they began to talk. The talk escalates into an argument. He continues to drink. He's drinking Southern Comfort. She leaves. The defendant leaves, and she goes to pick up her daughter Ashley from work. And when she comes back later that night, according to her, the victim here, David Castor, he's locked himself into his bedroom, and in a none too subtle manner, he has suggested to her that she's not coming in. She's sleeping out on the couch. According to her, all the bedding is now out on one of the sofas out in another part of the house. She goes to bed. He's still locked in the bedroom. No one sees him. Then, according to the defendant and according to the statement that she gave to the detectives, she gets up at about 4 a.m. Saturday morning. So this would be Saturday, August 20th. And she gets up to have a cigarette. And lo and behold, according to her statement, her and David Castor meet in their garage. And David is drinking Diet Pepsi now. And it's just the two of them. And according to her statement, they talk from 4 a.m. to 11 a.m. in the garage. 7 hours. Now, let me divert just for a minute, and let me make a point here about the proof that we're going to present to you. Location, timing, sequence is going to be absolutely critical for you to understand the nature of this case. Who was where when certain things happened? When did they happen? What's the timeline of certain things happening? So pay careful attention to those. Because we've now taken you from about 5 a.m. on Friday, 5 p.m. on Friday when David Castor returns from work. We're now into about 11 a.m. on Saturday. And except for a very short window there, is basically just the defendant and her husband. He's drinking first alcohol, booze, then he's drinking Diet Pepsi while she's smoking a cigarette. There's about 19 hours. The two of them are basically together. Back to her statement, back to what she tells the detectives. She and David go into the bedroom. There's a nightstand in the bedroom. Remember I told you if you're standing at the base of the bed, it'd be the reverse for you. If you're standing at the base of the bed, you're looking towards the bed. Right here, to your right, is a nightstand in the bedroom. She says, the defendant, that he puts down the glass he's drinking from, this Diet Pepsi, on the nightstand. And he says, she says, David doesn't feel well. He lays down, and soon thereafter, he throws up. She cleans up. He's still lying in the bed. She leaves the house at about 2:30 to pick up her other daughter, her youngest daughter, Bree, at her sister's house, the defendant's sister house. And she does various things throughout Saturday. She comes back home, according to her statement, the evidence will show, and David, when she goes into the bedroom this time, he is so out of it that he needed help to walk. Inside this bedroom, there's actually an attached bathroom. I guess they'd call that a master bathroom. It would be, what, 10 feet from the bed to the bathroom, if that. He can't even negotiate that, according to her. He's wobbly. She claims that he hurt his leg by falling on the floor. And then in her statement, she says when he's on the floor, she leaves him there. And when she leaves him there, she looks over at the nightstand, and there's an empty glass on the nightstand. And she doesn't come back to check on him until 7 o'clock that night. And oh yes, she says in her statement that I repeatedly asked David if he wanted medical attention, and he repeatedly said no. David Castor is in such bad shape on Saturday night that she calls up a friend, a guy you'll hear from by the name of Michael Coleman, to come over. Could you help me get him into bed? And I want you to listen very carefully to what Michael describes, what he sees and what he hears from David Castor. David Castor doesn't even know who he is. That's how bad shape this guy is. Eventually, she now has her daughter, who was working that day, Ashley, and she gets Bree, who's at some friend's house, and the three of them return home Saturday night, but sleep out in the living room. And I'll let her statement speak for itself and tell you the rest of what she claims happens that night. In her sworn statement, she says the last time I saw David Castor alive is at 5 a.m. Sunday, August the 21st. And according to her statement, the only things on the nightstand are 2 glasses, a bottle of cranberry juice, a telephone, a radio, and a decoration. That Sunday, she goes to a family party. The defendant does. The 2 girls stay at friends' houses. This is during the summer, don't forget. And for the first time in their marriage, they've been married a couple years now, the defendant decides that she is going to spend the night as well at a friend's house, because she claims she's frightened of the husband, who can't even walk to the bathroom. So let's go back to Wetzel Road now that you've heard a little summary of her story, and ask, okay, what does the evidence show there when the police arrive? What are the people going to prove about that? We're going to show you the bedroom. We're going to show you the body of David Castor as it appeared in the bed. We're going to show you a broken towel bar in the bathroom, undoubtedly caused by his own effort to raise himself from the floor. We're going to show you a picture of that jug of antifreeze, and we're going to show you the nightstand in that room. You're going to get a lesson in science in this case. Relax. You're going to be fine. You're not going to learn how to build a Swiss watch, but you're going to know how to tell time. Because you're going to get evidence about fingerprints, about toxicology, evidence collection, computers, handwriting analysis, wiretaps, exhumation, and DNA. I'm going to do this with Mr. Keller's consent. Your Honor, for the record, I'm referring to Exhibits 43 through 51, which I previously marked.
No objection, Judge.
All right.
I'm going to talk to you for a second about DNA. Tell me if your monitors are on.
You have to hit the bottom right-hand button, and I'll turn it on.
I knew someone would know how to do it.
That's my man, Gordy.
Does everybody have it on?
Good to go? Okay. DNA, an abbreviation for deoxyribose nucleic acid. Everybody in this jury panel shares 99.99% of the same DNA. But it's that other minuscule portion that makes us unique, that allows forensic scientists, in some cases, to say, this particular piece of evidence came from this particular individual. You're going to hear somebody describe it much better than I do. It comes out of our chromosomes. You remember from high school the double helix? Here are some of the sources of DNA. Probably already knew most of this. And we're going to hear about some of the DNA that was recovered in that bedroom. Particularly, we're going to be talking about saliva. What are the properties of DNA? Well, DNA is found in every cell of the body. Even though our cells are different, our fingernails are certainly different from our eyeballs, but the same DNA resides in both cells. It's stable under bad conditions. You can throw it around and step on it and do whatever you want to it. It's going to stay pretty much the same. It's the same throughout all the cells, and it won't change throughout anybody's lifetime. It's going to be the same at birth as it will be at death. Now what we do, what you're going to hear reference to, is polymerase chain reaction. Again, don't anybody panic. It's called PCR for short. You're going to hear one of the people, scientists, will use that phrase, PCR, and another phrase, STR. This is the technique. What we do is, what the scientists do, is that they have a sample of DNA, and you know, sometimes when I hear DNA, I think that it's a living organism. It's not. I mean, if you took DNA and just put it in a dish, it's just going to sit there and look at you. It's not going to look at you, it's just going to sit there. It's chemicals, proteins. So what they do is, so they can read it, they amplify it. They make more of it. And that's called short tandem repeats. PCR/STR. Very amenable to a small sample size, relatively short analysis time, although that's not of great relevance to you folks here, and very high power of discrimination, which is very relevant to you here. I won't show you the machine that they use, but they will heat the cellular material that they've recovered from a scene, and they will do a process of extraction and purification because we don't want contamination. We want to make sure that the DNA we're testing is the DNA that we recovered. You'll hear a lot about the evidence technicians preserving this crime scene by using plastic gloves. And the final step here is you get the PCR, what I was just talking about, the amplification. We take this little amount of DNA that we have and we multiply it several times until the scientist is able to say, okay, I've got enough DNA now, I can give you what? I can give you a profile. That's kind of one of the neatest things. This is what this has nothing to do with this case, folks. This is simply a demonstrative exhibit. You'll see the actual comparisons that were done in this case. So you look at this chart here and you say, okay, if I've got on top here, if I've got this question stain from the crime scene and I've got two people that I want to compare it to, A and B, well, it's certainly not A. On the top here, at one of the particular loci, we have a 13 and 14. On the person A, we've got 13 and 15. We need go no farther. It's not him, it's not her. But down here, at 3 locations, and you'll hear a lot more locations in this particular case, you have a match at those 3 locations. In this case, you're going to have matches at 13 locations. Now, why are there 2 alleles at each loci? Because you have a mom and a dad. And why is there 30 at just one of these locations? Because mom was a 30 and dad was a 30. So there, very simply, you take a sample of DNA recovered from a crime scene, you do a forensic evaluation of that sample, you isolate DNA from the other material, you generate a DNA profile, and then you have a DNA comparison and interpretation, which is another way of saying the ultimate conclusion. Did this DNA come from this person? And you'll hear in this particular case that a number of people gave DNA samples. Obviously, we retrieved a DNA sample from David Castor in death, and in life we retrieved DNA samples from the defendant, from her daughters, Ashley Wallace and Bree Wallace. And you'll hear about those very, very soon in this particular case. So now let's talk about, okay, we get a little handle on what DNA is all about. You told us about that nightstand. Let's take a look at what's on the nightstand and what forensically we're able to discover. And this, again, with defense consent, is Exhibit 17A, Your Honor. And I will put it up on the Elmo as well. Now, you good folks are actually in the position that the cops would be in when they walked in the door. We're going to prove that to you. We're going to show you the evidence. We're going to show you the pictures of that. And this is exactly the way they found the nightstand. You'll see pictures of it. You'll see other pictures of it. Apricot brandy bottle. Stacey Castor's fingerprint on that bottle. You will hear evidence that she told the police, I never touched that bottle. Ocean Spray cranberry juice bottle. Empty. Stacey Castor's fingerprints on it. David Castor's single fingerprint on it. Subject, give the devil his due, subject to multiple interpretations. Who knows? Maybe somebody touched it a week ago. Maybe somebody brought it home from the grocery store. Nevertheless, there it is. That's what was found. Empty glass, except it's not quite empty. You'll see a picture of it before it was tested for fingerprints. And when you see the picture of it, the glass is dirty. It's smudgy on the side. You'll also see David Castor's hands. And you'll also see that David Castor's fingerprint is on this glass, that David Castor's DNA is on the rim of that glass, which suggests that he drank something from the glass, as well as touching it. And what was in the glass, at some point in its history, was regular booze or alcohol. And then we come, the people will show, to this glass. Now, mind you, remember what I told you about the defendant's statement, which you're going to hear in evidence in this case. 2 glasses, empty. Didn't see any of this stuff. But nevertheless, there it is. David Castor's DNA has been discovered on the rim of that glass. Stacey Castor's fingerprints are on that glass. That glass, unlike the glass to its right, is extraordinarily clean. You'll see pictures of it. And what is that green liquid in the glass? Ethylene glycol, antifreeze. Okay? Maybe Mrs. Castor took it out of the dishwasher, put it on the counter. Mr. Castor picked it up, filled it with antifreeze. You can make all kinds of arguments you want. That is what the evidence is going to show occurred in this bedroom. That's what the physical forensic evidence is going to show. Remember Willoughby? Willoughby's going to tell you that in addition to looking and preserving and helping collect, as did other officers, trained evidence technicians, Willoughby's going to tell you that he went into the kitchen and he looked in the trash. Everybody's probably got one of these in these kitchens, one of these little buckets of trash. You hit the thing with your foot, pops open, you put your junk in there, and you wait breathlessly for your kids to take it out to the front yard, but it never happens. So he goes into the kitchen and he sees this, and he's there lawfully, and he's going to conduct a search. And he looks in it, and he moves some trash that's off the top, and he looks in, and he sees, you'll see it in evidence, so don't go by me. What is that? Probably a foot, maybe 8 inches to a foot. A turkey baster. Turkey baster, okay. Willoughby thinks to himself, well, what's that doing there? He points it out to the evidence technician. You ought to recover that. Willoughby says, you know, I looked at it and it looked brand new. Why would you throw it out? I don't know. No fingerprints recovered from the turkey baster. 2 things recovered from the turkey baster. Inside the turkey baster, ethylene glycol. on the tip the DNA of David Castor. So you can see why some people thought, let's not make a rush to judgment here. Let's look a little more carefully at this particular case. And so the investigation continues. Other evidence is checked. They checked they checked David Castor's body. He has no alcohol in the system. He has a minimal amount of ethylene glycol in his system. Remember I told you about sequence and timing is important? You listen to the medical experts talk about how ethylene glycol kills you. There will be no dispute amongst anyone in this trial, a horrible way to die. It is slow, it is painful. In its initial stages, it can mimic alcohol intoxication. You feel woozy and you don't know why. You can't walk. You might have trouble going to the bathroom. It tastes very sweet, which is why many animals are killed every year from sneaking into a garage maybe and licking up antifreeze, because it tastes good. Alcohol, what we call alcohol, booze, can slow down the effects of ethylene glycol. In fact, it's the antidote. If some person comes into the emergency room today and says, I just tried to kill myself by drinking ethylene glycol, they're going to give them an alcohol drip. For some reason, when your liver has the chance to metabolize ethylene glycol or Jack Daniels, the liver goes for the Jack Daniels. And the ethylene glycol goes in as ethylene glycol and it comes out as ethylene glycol. But when it doesn't, and your liver does its job, it turns the ethylene glycol into, eventually, glycolic acid. And it crystallizes, and it forms in your kidneys, and your brain, and some of your other organs, and it shuts them down. So you might be asking yourself, and if you're as good a jurors as I think you are, you will be asking yourselves, why does David Castor kill himself over 3 days when he's got a shotgun under the bed, as the evidence will show? So the investigation continues. The call for further review wins out over the call to quickly label this a suicide. And the weeks turn into months. And the investigation, as the people will show, don't support the defendant's claims about depression. Claims about the business failures doesn't appear to be true. It looks like the business was in decent shape. And early on, in fact, I think that day, the 22nd, when noticing that the two girls are named Wallace as opposed to Castor, the defendant tells detectives, well, I've been married before. Their father is Michael Wallace. He's no longer with us. He died of a massive coronary back in the year 2000. Okay, the detectives say, guy died of a heart attack, died of a heart attack. Or did he die of a heart attack? Because now, ladies and gentlemen, as the people present the proof to you, we've turned the clock back to the year 2005. We're going to turn the sands of time back a little bit farther. We're going to turn the sands of time back to the year 2000. Because as the investigation continues and the detectives make inquiry about the death of Michael Wallace, defendant's first husband, they don't find that fact suspicious in and of itself. There's plenty of people who have a spouse that dies and they remarry, and perhaps because of the fate dealing them a bad set of cards, the second spouse dies. And after all, she wouldn't lie to us about that. He did die of a heart attack. That's what she told us. So the police investigate that, and we're going to share some of that investigation with you. That on January the 11th in the year 2000, an ambulance personnel are called to the home of 38-year-old Michael Wallace, who lives in Weedsport, New York, with his wife, Stacey, the defendant here, and their two daughters, Ashley and Bree. And present when they get there is Stacey Wallace, and they see Michael Wallace lying, apparently dead, on his couch. They learned from the defendant that he had been discovered lying there earlier in that day by his two daughters, Ashley, who was 12, and Bree, who was 8. And the first responders quickly concluded that Michael was dead. And one of them says, and he will testify to this, that he had a peculiar substance in his mouth. And he thought, the responder, he thought it was coffee grounds. Coffee grounds. It didn't really make a lot of sense to him. And then he's rushed. They make Herculean efforts to try to save the poor fellow's life, but they can't. He's rushed to Auburn Memorial. He's got family. His friends are there. The defendant responds there. And he's pronounced dead. And later, when this first responder hears that it was determined to be a heart attack, he raises a quizzical expression in his own mind that he'll tell you about, and he'll tell you it didn't look like any heart attack I had ever seen. And the defendant, who's there, says, well, I don't want an autopsy. And there's some dispute about that. Some of the family members, some of the friends and relatives say, well, wait a minute, time out. The guy died of a heart attack. How do we know he died of a heart attack? Wouldn't you want, Stacey, wouldn't you want to be sure in case there's some health issue that might affect Ashley and Bree? She says, no, Michael would never want to be disturbed in death. I don't want an autopsy in this particular case. And quite frankly, and I make no apology for it, very foolishly, they accede to her request, and Michael Wallace is buried with no autopsy, and they say, well, it was a heart attack. And Stacey, Ashley, and Bree move on. The defendant collects some insurance money from his death, and but for August of 2005, Michael Wallace would have rested in his grave for the rest of eternity. But eventually, as this investigation progressed, the police made an uncomfortable but totally necessary request, which you will hear about in this case. They asked the judge to allow them permission to exhume the body of Michael Wallace. And while police in Cayuga County did that, police in Onondaga County asked another judge for the extraordinary but necessary authority to listen to this defendant's phone calls. And as I said to you, and I want to emphasize to you again, you will hear some of those phone calls. You will not hear the defendant saying, I did it. But when you consider what I told you about, sequence, timing, who was where when certain things happened, those phone calls will help prove that to you, not beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond any possible doubt whatsoever. And so on September the 5th, without the defendant's knowledge, the body of Michael Wallace is exhumed and autopsied for the very, very first time. And very, very soon, upon examining the body of Michael Wallace, Dr. Robert Stoppaker sees those telltale crystals in the organs, in the brain and the kidneys. And he makes a determination that Mike Wallace, his heart was as fine as anybody in this room. Michael Wallace died of antifreeze poisoning. Now the police let the defendant know eventually that they are onto her. They're hoping that something will happen, that she'll say something on the phone. And it's quite obvious that the investigation is nearing its conclusion. Until we get to September the 14th, 2007. On September the 14th, the evidence will show the unthinkable happens. There's another 911 call, again by this defendant, in fact listened to by the detectives who are monitoring her phones. Only this time the defendant calls 911 to report that her daughter, Ashley, has tried to kill herself with vodka and pills. And you'll listen to the 911 call. And I don't get involved in, did she sound distressed? Did she sound calm? Frankly, it doesn't bother me. If you think she sounds calm, fine. If you think she sounds distressed, fine. It is what it is. She calls. During the call, you'll hear her say, there's a note. The police respond. Ashley's taken to the hospital. And again, the defendant tells the police what happened over the last several days in September in a note that you will read during this trial. And basically the defendant says, on Thursday, Mr. Keller, this is another calendar. This would be September of '07. She tells him on Thursday, September the 13th. This is the date. The body is exhumed on the 5th. Thursday, September the 13th. The defendant in her statement says that her daughter Ashley comes home from Bryan and Stratton. Ashley's a student at Bryan and Stratton. She also works. They went out. They were going to do something. And then at about 1:30, according to the defendant, Ashley Wallace decides that she wants to take a nap. And she's napping for the next 20 hours, according to this defendant. And in addition to that, according to the defendant, this is all perfectly normal. She even tells people, she says in her statement, Ashley was sleeping normally at 7 o'clock, at 8 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, at midnight, at 1 o'clock, until finally 6:30 the next morning, Bree goes into her sister's bedroom and sees, the evidence will show, that her sister is almost dead. And the evidence will also show that the defendant left out an awful lot of things that happened during that week in September '07. We're going to tell you what happened in September of '07. We're going to tell you how on Wednesday, September the 12th, the defendant wanted to celebrate with her daughter Ashley and gave her a drink. And even though Ashley had on occasion had alcoholic beverages before in her life, that drink knocked her out, made her vomit, passed out in the bed. But nevertheless, she got up on Thursday morning and went to school. And when she comes home from school, Mom says, hey, we've had a rough week. The evidence will show, let's have a drink. Let's celebrate. And I want you to listen, at whatever point she testifies, to Ashley Wallace, this defendant's own daughter, tell you about that drink. And then you will hear evidence about a note. It will be referred to, it will be admitted into evidence as Exhibit 1. It will be referred to variously as a note or a suicide note or just a note. I will refer to it as the single most important piece of evidence that the people will present to you in this case. I understand that not the entire note is visible. Don't worry, I'll correct that. This is the entire note. This is Exhibit 1A, again with defense counsel's permission. Let's talk about what the people will prove to you as a result of this note. And let me point out that your job as fact finder just got incredibly, remarkably, unalterably easier. Because now, when you see this note and you read it as we go through it, you will realize, beyond any shadow of a doubt, the person that wrote that note killed Michael Wallace and killed David Castor. There isn't any other explanation. So, did a burglar do it? Forget about it. Did a mafia hitman come in and do this? Don't worry about it. The person that wrote that note killed Michael Wallace and David Castor. How do I know that? How will you know that, more importantly? Let's take a look at it. For one thing, the evidence is going to show you that this note, this War and Peace of Suicide notes, almost 700 words long, is dumbed down by somebody. Somebody intentionally tried to mislead the reader as to who the author of this note was. And you will ask yourself, and you will see Ashley Wallace, who will say, I never wrote that note. I never authored that note. Somebody did. And somebody wanted to spell, for example, look at the word they. And now they do. And then 2 words later, they is spelled correctly. Why would that be? Because somebody's trying to disguise it, the evidence is going to show. Look at this word. Very unusual word. Never heard this word before. Anti-free. Anti-free. In fact, it occurs 4 times. Put the anti-free in his glass. I put the anti-free in Daddy's Gatorade. I poured the anti-free in the glass. Let's go through it. Mommy, when you read the letter, just remember I love you, and everything I did is because I love you. I'm sorry all of this is happening to you, but now everyone is going to know what really happened. And they know it wasn't you. It was me. No one was ever supposed to know about Daddy. Now, you notice that I just said no one when it said none and ever instead of every. I'm not going to read it as it was misspelled. Things you never knew about. He was drinking. When he was at Pick and Pull House and at Lisa's house, he was smoking pot again. 2, I saw him. He was mean to you and me, and he only ever loved Bree. I couldn't let him do those things to you anymore. You think I don't remember how things were, but I do. And I didn't want to ever live like that anymore. It wasn't fair to you or me. Daddy wasn't going to be good to you or Bree ever, only Bree. I couldn't stand it anymore. The cops said there was anti-free in Daddy's body, but did they tell anyone about the rat poison? 2. Rat poison. This note, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show, was discovered on September the 14th, 2007. On September the 7th, 2007, Dominic Spinelli spoke to this defendant. And for the very first time in his life, he heard somebody use a very peculiar word. And he documented it days before this note was ever found. And what was that word? What will the evidence show that word was? Anti-free. And so we go on. When I got home from school that day, I knew what was going on. Daddy was barely breathing. I knew he was going to die. That's why I didn't call you for help or anyone else. I wanted to make sure he couldn't be mean to you or me anymore. He died before I went to pick Bree up from school. I watched him, and I knew he couldn't hurt you anymore. Then we were happy for a while, just the 3 of us. And what did the exhumation show of Michael Wallace? In addition to the ethylene glycol, a fact that quite literally only the killer could have known because no one even mentioned it in this case prior to September the 14th? He had rat poison in his body. And then you married David, and he was mean to you. He was mean to all of us, meaner than Daddy. And I knew you loved him like you loved Daddy, and you were going to let him treat you like he did. And you wouldn't leave. It wasn't fair, Mommy. He didn't love you or me or Bree. I never thought anyone would miss David, D-A-V-E-D, even though someone has spelled it D-A-V-I-D just minutes or seconds before. Never thought anyone would miss David none, but you loved him. It was harder than with Daddy because you were always home or with him. But it did it. I made sure he would never hurt you anymore to that Friday when David came home so you could go to the post office is when I first did it. It was easy. I asked him if he wanted something to drink, and I put the antifreeze in his glass with some soda. He drank 2 whole glasses. That was it. It only took longer for David than with Daddy once I put the antifreeze in Daddy's Gatorade. It only took a day or so, and that's when he died, when you were sleeping on the couch after David locked himself in the room. I got the extra key because I knew where he hid it, and I put stuff in the room. I tried to get him to drink some of that booze with the dropper thing, but he was out of it and wouldn't. I poured the antifreeze in the glass and on the floor and left the bottle in the room, and then I put the gloves back in the kitchen and got ready for work. You never knew, and know all of these cops are saying all of this stuff about you to everyone. You know and love, Mommy. It's just not fair when you told me they dug Daddy up. I knew what was going to happen. No one was ever supposed to know, Mommy, and now they do, and they think you did it. But you didn't. It was me. When the cops came to my school today, I thought they had figured it out, and I was going to go to jail, but they didn't take me, Mommy. I can't live like this and watch what they are doing to you. Not anymore. But I can't go to jail for the rest of my life. I can't put you through that. I did the only thing I could to help you, Mommy. I know you hate me for doing what I did, but Mommy, remember I love you more than anything, and I did it for you and for us. Please forgive me, Mommy. Someday, when all of this is over, please forgive me. Make sure you take care of Bree. She is all you have left now. Remember how happy we all were together, and you will be happy again. I promise you, Mommy. Tell Matt I love him, and I'm sorry. Tell Bree to be a good girl for you, and I love her now too. Please don't hate me. Remember, I love you, Ashley. Well, somebody wrote that note. Somebody dumbed it down, the proof will show. Somebody put the word antifreeze in there 4 times, and somebody put rat poison in there. And it wasn't, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show it wasn't Ashley Wallace. Ask yourself a question. You just read the note for me. Is it dated? Is it dated? It is. When the cops came to my school today, it's dated. You are going to hear proof that the only time the cops ever came to Ashley Wallace's school at Bryan and Stratton, rightfully or wrongfully, was on Wednesday, September the 12th, 2007. Wednesday, September the 12th, 2007 is today. That's what the proof is going to show. And you're going to hear about times that occurred on September the 12th, 2007. And you're also going to hear from some unbelievable doctors that examined Ashley Wallace at the hospital on September the 14th. They're going to tell you that no other time in their professional careers had they ever seen such a smorgasbord of chemicals thrown into a human being's body. And the massive efforts that they made to save her life and how close she came to death. And you will hear proof from the very witnesses that were there that when Ashley Wallace came to and was able to carry on a coherent conversation, one of the sheriff's detectives there tried to trick her and try to get her to say that she had written the note and taken the pills. And yet, with no guile whatsoever, the proof is going to show that she looked at him and said, "What note? Mom gave me an Ambien pill. I didn't write any note. I didn't try to kill myself. I'm in school. I just had my first day of school. I have a boyfriend." You listen to the testimony of those witnesses, and you ask yourselves whether or not it is in any way remotely consistent with a young woman trying to take her life. Computers, right? I told you about that. We seized the defendant's computer from her home on Wetzel Road. You hit that erase button, folks. It don't erase. It goes somewhere. And these guys are going to tell you about it because an amazing discovery was found on the computer. Not only was this War and Peace of suicide notes not found, but 2 practice notes were found. Now think about it. 2 practice suicide notes on the computer. And we will prove to you, beyond any doubt whatsoever, that this note was written on the defendant's computer at Wetzel Road. We will present evidence to you that this note was generated sometime before 2:37 p.m. on Wednesday, September the 12th, 2007. Now, what did I just tell you? I just told you that this suicide note, that whoever wrote it, killed 2 people. There isn't any question about that. I just told you that this suicide note, this attempted murder note, had to have been written after 8:40 a.m. when Ashley called her mother and said 2 cops just visited me at school, because it makes reference in the note to that visit by the 2 cops. And the computer forensic analyst that the people will present to you will tell you that that note was generated prior to 2:37 p.m. on Wednesday, September the 12th. Somebody wrote that note. Somebody wrote that note and had it printed at Wetzel Road. Somebody practiced that note the day before. And somebody, between 8:40 a.m. and 2:37 p.m., printed out that note and put it in Ashley's bedroom at the appropriate time. Maybe Ashley killed her father when she was 12. Maybe she committed the perfect crime undetected. You're going to have to listen to the evidence and make that judgment. We will show you with painstaking detail, by proof, where Ashley Wallace was on September the 12th, 2007, between the hours of 8:40 a.m. and 2:37 p.m., and the answer will be she was nowhere near her home. She was at school. In fact, her own mother, the defendant, will corroborate that. Where was the defendant? You listen to the proof. You listen to the proof that we present, and we'll show you where she was. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That, in a nutshell, is the people's case. I apologize for going on so long. It's really talking about 3 separate crimes, plus the evidence that we're going to present about the phony will. I have faith in you. I have faith that you will scrutinize this evidence and listen to it, analyze it, probe it, and you will ultimately ask yourself, did 12-year-old Ashley Wallace write this note and commit this crime against her own father, and then when she was 12 and then 5 years later murder her stepfather? Did she murder her father with antifreeze and then put rat poison in him? And did she murder her stepfather with antifreeze? Did she attempt to take her own life and confess to these 2 horrible murders and then immediately deny it upon waking up? or did this defendant murder her first husband, collect his insurance, murder her second husband, and collect his insurance and his business, and then, realizing that the authorities were coming in because of the exhumation of Michael Wallace, attempt to murder her own flesh and blood and pin these crimes on her. This is a tale of two women who are joined forever by biology and joined inexorably at this trial by murder. The answers to those questions, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, will be as obvious as they appear. When this trial concludes, I will ask you to look at the factors. And if you, at the end of the day, feel that the scales are balanced, that it's just as likely that Ashley Wallace wrote this note and committed these crimes as it is that Stacey Castor wrote this note and committed these crimes, then you stand up and you shout as loud as you can the words "not guilty." But when you weigh these evidence, and when you put this scale together, and when you put the balance sheet together, and you look at one or two innocuous things that might point to Ashley Wallace, and you look at the mountain of evidence that points to this defendant, you will have no choice but to do your duty and stand up and shout as loud as you can, "Mrs. Castor, you are a murderer, and you tried to kill your own daughter, and for that you will pay." Thank you.
Right, why don't we take a 10-minute recess? Please don't talk about the case amongst yourselves, and don't let anybody talk about the case with you. We'll be back in 10 minutes.